They don't teach this in gardening books, but Grandpa sure knew a thing or two. These 12 borax gardening tricks have been quietly passed down through generations, and for good reason. From boosting compost to killing weeds, borax can do way more than clean your laundry. In this video, we're revealing the clever, old-school hacks Grandpa used to grow stronger plants, keep pests away, and save money doing it. These are the tricks professional gardeners don't want you to know about, but you're about to learn them all. Number 1. Kill ant colonies without poison. Ants may seem harmless on the surface, but when they take root in your garden, they're often a sign of deeper issues: aphid infestations, root rot, or nutrient imbalances. Grandpa had a saying: if ants are building, something underneath's already broken. Instead of turning to chemical solutions, he used a homemade ant killer that was safe around plants and didn't contaminate the soil, a mix of borax and sugar. The formula was simple: 1 part borax to 3 parts granulated sugar. The sugar acts as bait, enticing ants to carry the borax back to the colony. Once inside the nest, the borax disrupts their digestive systems and kills them over time, including the queen, which prevents the colony from rebuilding. This method is especially effective when sprinkled in thin trails, along ant pathways, or near the entrance of the anthill. Unlike sprays that provide a temporary fix, this method breaks the colony from the inside. Grandpa often used small bottle caps or jar lids to place the mixture strategically, especially around raised garden beds and compost piles, places where ants like to congregate. The key was consistency and patience. Within a few days, you'd notice ant activity decreasing, and after a week, most colonies would collapse. He also emphasized safety. Keep the mixture out of reach of pets or children, as ingestion can be harmful. What made this trick so effective is that it targeted the problem without disrupting the ecosystem of the garden. Worms, bees, and beneficial insects were left alone. It was cheap, easy, and most importantly, it worked. Number 2, get rid of weeds naturally. Weeds don't just make your garden look messy, they compete with your plants for water, nutrients, and sunlight. Grandpa had a low-tech but surprisingly effective solution using borax to eliminate weeds without relying on chemical herbicides. The method he used involved dissolving 10 ounces of borax in 2.5 gallons of warm water and pouring it directly onto the leaves and base of the weeds. This mix delivers a concentrated dose of boron, which weeds can't tolerate. The boron interferes with the plant's cellular structure and enzyme systems, effectively shutting down growth. However, this approach requires precision. Borax doesn't distinguish between bad and good plants. Too much will harm vegetables, flowers, or shrubs. That's why Grandpa only used it on gravel paths, driveway cracks, and along fence lines, areas where nothing useful was growing. He never used it on his vegetable rows or flower beds unless he was spot treating with a brush or small syringe. One of the biggest advantages of this method was longevity. Unlike commercial weed sprays that need reapplying every week or two, borax could suppress growth for a month or more. In dry climates, a single treatment might even last the whole season. Grandpa always advised testing a small area first and waiting a few days to see how the soil reacted. He also avoided using this method right before rain, which could spread the boron to nearby plants unintentionally. It was a method rooted in patience and precision, but when done right, it left his walkways spotless and his garden beds untouched. Number 3, make soil more fertile with caution. What most home gardeners don't realize is that boron, a trace element found in borax, is essential for healthy plant growth, especially in root vegetables and leafy greens. Grandpa discovered this long before garden centers started selling micronutrient mixes, but he also knew that too much boron could be toxic. His rule was simple: test your soil and treat it sparingly. If the soil tested low in boron, and many sandy or leached soils do, he'd mix 1 teaspoon of borax into 1 gallon of water and use it to water 100 square feet of garden soil. That's it, no more. He'd only apply it once a season, often in early spring, just as the plants were waking up. Crops like broccoli, beets, cabbage, carrots, and turnips thrived when given the right amount of boron. It helped with calcium uptake, cell wall development, and flowering. He always tracked which sections of his garden had been treated and rotated his applications from year to year. Over time, he noticed improved yields, stronger stems, and fewer deformities in root crops. He avoided treating clay-heavy soils, which tend to hold on to boron longer, increasing the risk of overdose. This wasn't a fix-all fertilizer. It was a fine-tuning approach. The difference it made, though, was significant, especially in older gardens where repeated planting had stripped the soil of key nutrients. Modern gardeners using compost and organic amendments might still run into boron deficiencies, particularly if rain has washed minerals away over the years. Grandpa's trick helped restore balance using a household staple, without needing to buy specialty products or guess at complicated ratios. Number 4, protect fruit trees from borers. Tree borers are a gardener's nightmare. These small larvae burrow into the bark and feed on the sapwood, slowly draining the life out of even the strongest trees. Grandpa had a simple but effective remedy: borax paste. He'd make it by mixing borax with just enough water to create a thick, brushable consistency. Then he'd apply the paste to the lower trunk and any visible cracks or wounds in the bark, especially during the dormant season when pests are looking for places to lay eggs. The borax acted as a mild insect deterrent, not as harsh as chemical pesticides, but enough to make the area unwelcoming to egg-laying insects. This trick worked particularly well on apple, peach, and cherry trees, which are especially vulnerable to borer attacks. After big storms or heavy pruning, Grandpa would always inspect his trees for new wounds and reapply the paste if necessary. He avoided applying it to new growth or leaves, focusing strictly on the trunk and older wood. Over time, he noticed fewer signs of sap leakage, fewer boreholes, and healthier bark overall. While this method won't stop an active infestation, it's a great preventative measure. It also pairs well with pruning practices that improve airflow and reduce moisture buildup, conditions borers love. Grandpa's orchard stood out in the neighborhood not because it was big or fancy, but because it was clean, quiet, and thriving. His use of borax gave his trees a fighting chance without spraying toxins into the air or soil. It was one of those old-world tricks that proved its worth season after season. Number 5, keep houseplants thriving. Grandpa always said a house wasn't a home unless it had a few green friends soaking up sunshine in every window. He believed potted plants brought life to a room and peace to the mind. But when his ferns, geraniums, or violets started looking dull or stopped blooming, he didn't rush to buy expensive fertilizers. Instead, he turned to his tiny jar of borax tucked on a high shelf. A single grain-sized pinch stirred into a quart of water was his go-to tonic. It sounds too simple, but there's real science behind it. Boron, one of the elements in borax, is essential for plant growth. It helps move sugars throughout the plant, supports cell wall strength, and plays a key role in flower and fruit formation. But it's incredibly easy to overdo. A few extra pinches and you could burn the roots. That's why Grandpa used an old mason jar lid with small holes punched into it, like a DIY watering can. This let him pour just enough into each pot without the risk of flooding them. He'd only apply the mix every few months, especially during the growing season. And the difference was clear. His African violets would bloom longer, his spider plants stretched fuller, and even the grumpiest little jade plants perked up. The trick wasn't just about borax, it was about watching closely, giving the right care at the right time, and resisting the urge to overdo it. Grandpa knew that with plants, as with people, sometimes they just need a gentle nudge, not a full intervention. His methods saved money, avoided synthetic fertilizers, and kept his leafy companions healthy year-round. Today, houseplant lovers are rediscovering this forgotten hack and wondering why they ever stopped using it in the first place. Number 6, treat powdery mildew fast. If you've ever walked out to your garden one morning and found your squash leaves dusted in that familiar white fuzz, you know the panic that powdery mildew brings? It starts as a few small patches and, if ignored, takes over like wildfire. Grandpa had no patience for it. He'd grab his metal spray bottle, drop in a tablespoon of borax, pour in a quart of warm water, shake it until dissolved, and head straight for the garden. The key to his success was timing. He never waited for the mildew to spread. At the first sign, he sprayed the tops and undersides of every leaf, making sure they were lightly coated but not soaked. The borax worked as a mild fungicide, interfering with the mildew's ability to reproduce. It didn't kill the existing spores instantly, but it slowed them down enough to let the plant catch its breath. Over a few treatments, usually spaced out every 3 to 5 days, the spread would stop. And his plants? They bounced back like nothing happened. He always reminded us not to go overboard. Too much borax too often can throw off the soil's balance and harm the plant itself. But when used sparingly and correctly, this trick offered a chemical-free way to protect plants without worrying about residues that might end up on your dinner plate. It also didn't harm bees or earthworms, something Grandpa was adamant about preserving. His solution worked especially well on cucumbers, pumpkins, zucchini, and even roses. And the best part? It was a zero-waste solution using a pantry staple, with no plastic jugs or fancy ingredients needed. Grandpa's mildew treatment didn't just save crops, it saved peace of mind. Number 7, extend flower life in vases. Fresh-cut flowers are one of life's simplest joys, but also one of the quickest to fade. A day or two on the table and those bright blooms start drooping. Grandpa had a fix for that, one he swore by, whether it was a bouquet for Grandma or a few wild zinnias picked for the kitchen. His recipe was simple: a pinch of borax, a sugar cube, and a tiny drop of bleach, all added to the vase water. The borax slowed the growth of bacteria, keeping the stems clear so water could move freely. Sugar fed the flowers just enough to maintain color and perkiness, while the bleach killed off any leftover microbes that might cloud the water. It sounds too easy, but it worked every time. Grandpa would trim the stems at a sharp angle, strip off any leaves that might sit below the waterline, and set the bouquet in this homemade solution. Roses held their shape for a week. Lilies stayed vibrant well past when they'd normally fade. Even delicate blooms like cosmos or marigolds lasted longer. He was careful never to add too much, just enough to balance things. Too much borax or bleach, and the flowers would wilt faster, not slower. He always reminded us, it's about supporting, not smothering. This trick wasn't just for show. He gave away fresh-cut arrangements to neighbors, friends, and anyone feeling down. That little touch of extra care turned a temporary gesture into something lasting. Today, florists still use versions of Grandpa's mix, but few realize it's rooted in simple, homemade wisdom. And unlike store-bought preservatives, this method is cheap, natural, and just as powerful, proving once again that Grandpa knew how to make everything stretch a little farther and a little longer. Number 8, deter mice and insects in garden sheds. There's something about garden sheds that attracts all the wrong guests. Whether it's mice chewing into seed bags or roaches crawling around the potting bench, these critters always seem to find a way in. Grandpa didn't rely on fancy traps or toxic sprays. His answer? Good old-fashioned borax. He'd leave open lids of jars or tuna cans filled with borax tucked into corners, behind shelves, and near the shed door. Mice hate the smell and texture of it, and insects won't go near it. But for the stubborn invaders, like roaches or silverfish, he had an extra trick. He'd mix equal parts borax, flour, and unsweetened cocoa powder and spoon little mounds of it onto pieces of cardboard. The cocoa drew them in, the flour masked the borax, and once consumed, it was game over. It was quiet, safe around his tools, and didn't leave behind chemical smells or sticky messes. He was always careful to keep the bait away from where pets might wander, but otherwise, it was hands-off and effective. In the cold months, when mice looked for warm nesting spots, these little bait piles did their job without constant maintenance. No traps to reset, no poisons to worry about. Grandpa checked the corners once a month, refreshed the mix, and went on with his chores. What's surprising is how long this method has been around, yet most people today forget how effective it is. Modern pest control companies still use variations of this formula in sensitive areas. And while it's not the kind of trick you see advertised in hardware stores, it's the one professionals quietly rely on. Grandpa's shed always smelled of old wood, soil, and something faintly sweet, but never of pests. Number 9, preserve bulbs for next season. Bulb flowers like tulips, daffodils, and hyacinths bring bursts of color in spring, but behind those blooms is careful off-season prep. After the last petals fell and the leaves yellowed, Grandpa would gently dig up his bulbs and begin the ritual he'd followed for decades. First, he'd brush off the soil by hand, never washing them, just dry cleaning. Then he'd lightly dust each bulb with borax using a soft cloth or old sock. The borax acted like a protective shell against moisture, fungi, and insects. Next came the storage setup. He reused shoe boxes and wooden crates lined with sawdust, shredded newspaper, or straw. Each bulb got its own little nest with breathing room to prevent crowding. The boxes were stacked in the coolest, driest part of the basement, dark but ventilated. What made borax especially valuable was how it controlled both rot and pests without harming the bulb's future growth. Grandpa learned this the hard way after a few seasons lost to mold outbreaks. Once he started the borax method, the difference was obvious. Come spring, his bulbs emerged dry, firm, and eager to grow. He'd replant them just before the final frost melted, and within weeks, green shoots pierced the soil. This practice wasn't just about protection, it was about ensuring consistency year after year. Commercial bulb treatments can be expensive and often contain chemicals that linger in soil. Grandpa's way was simple, affordable, and effective. He believed in doing things right the first time, and this method saved both time and money when planting season rolled around again. Even today, seasoned gardeners still pass this trick down, whispering it like a secret too good to keep. Because when it comes to gardening, sometimes the oldest tools are still the sharpest. Number 10, boost compost quality. Composting isn't just about throwing food scraps and leaves into a pile and hoping for the best. It's a delicate process that relies on the right balance of carbon, nitrogen, moisture, air, and microbial life. Grandpa understood this well, and he had a simple trick to give his compost a serious edge. He added borax. Not a lot, just about a tablespoon per wheelbarrow load of compost. That tiny bit of borax was enough to introduce boron, a micronutrient that quietly supports the metabolic activity of certain beneficial microbes in the pile. These microbes play a key role in breaking down tough plant materials, especially high-carbon inputs like straw, sawdust, or dry autumn leaves. Boron helps them work faster and more efficiently. Grandpa was careful, though. He always warned that too much borax would upset the microbial balance and actually stall decomposition. That's why he only did this once a month, and only when his pile seemed sluggish, like when it stopped heating up properly or wasn't reducing in volume. After sprinkling the borax, he'd turn the compost thoroughly with a pitchfork, letting air in and redistributing the layers. The results were impressive. Compost that was darker, richer, and more crumbly than anything store-bought. Plants absolutely loved it, especially fruiting vegetables like tomatoes and squash. Grandpa's compost piles were famous in the neighborhood for their speed and quality, and this borax trick was one of his secret weapons. He kept his methods simple but incredibly effective, always relying on observation and intuition to guide him. If a batch of compost didn't steam when he turned it, he knew it needed help, and that's where borax came in, not as a crutch, but as a booster. Just one more reason why his garden always looked a little greener than everyone else's. Number 11, clean and sanitize garden tools. Long before garden centers started selling fancy cleaning sprays and tool sanitizers, Grandpa had his own method that was both natural and shockingly effective. He mixed borax with freshly squeezed lemon juice to form a gritty paste that worked wonders on gardening tools. Whether it was pruning shears covered in sticky sap or a rusted trowel that had seen better days, this homemade scrub cleaned everything down to the bare metal. The borax provided abrasion and mineral cleaning power, while the lemon juice cut through organic residue and even helped dissolve minor corrosion. Once a tool was clean, Grandpa always rinsed it thoroughly with water and dried it immediately. Never left them to air dry, not even on a sunny day. Moisture was the enemy, he'd say. After drying, he rubbed a small amount of vegetable oil or linseed oil into the metal parts and wooden handles to protect against future rust in drying. This kept his tools working like new for decades. But the real purpose wasn't just maintenance, it was plant protection. Dirty tools carry bacteria and fungi from one plant to another. A pair of clippers used on a sick tomato could spread blight to healthy ones in a matter of minutes. That's why Grandpa had a firm rule. Tools had to be cleaned after every major gardening session, especially when trimming diseased or stressed plants. He even kept a small kit in the shed with borax, lemons, an old toothbrush, and a rag. Every season, he'd do a deep clean, sharpen blades, inspect handles, tighten screws. Tools weren't just equipment to him, they were investments. And thanks to this simple borax hack, those tools lasted longer, worked better, and kept the garden healthier. It's one of those forgotten habits that modern gardeners would do well to bring back. Number 12, control algae in bird baths and fountains. Outdoor water features are beautiful, but can quickly become eyesores if you don't stay on top of maintenance. Algae grows fast in standing water, especially during warm months. Grandpa noticed this early on with his cast iron bird bath, and instead of dumping the water every day or using harsh chemicals, he relied on borax. He'd sprinkle just a pinch, less than a quarter teaspoon, into the water once a week. It was enough to disrupt the algae's ability to multiply, but not enough to harm the birds. In fact, many commercial bird bath cleaners rely on boron derivatives, but they come with high price tags. Grandpa preferred his method because it was simple, safe, and effective. Before each weekly treatment, he'd empty and scrub the basin with a stiff brush and hot water. No soap, just elbow grease. Once cleaned, he'd refill it and add the borax, letting it dissolve naturally. The water stayed clearer for days longer, and the birds always returned. For larger features like garden fountains or small koi-free ponds, he used a similar method, diluting a small amount of borax into a bucket of water before adding it to the system. The key was restraint. He'd never use it if frogs or fish were present, since their sensitivity to boron is higher. But for open-air features that were prone to green slime, this hack was unbeatable. It saved time, water, and effort, keeping the yard looking sharp and the wildlife happy. It's another one of those overlooked tricks that turns out to be more efficient than modern alternatives, and way more budget-friendly. Grandpa didn't need a label to tell him what worked. He just paid attention, tried things out, and stuck with what made sense. That's why his bird bath never went green, even in the middle of summer.